Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to Totally Accurate Battle Simulator. This is like the third time I've tried recording this now. I've been interrupted every time. But this is not going to be another battle video. This is just going to be me talking about the game and what I want to see from the unit creator. This isn't me giving any sort of list of demands to Landfall saying add this now. This isn't me saying if they don't add this I'm going to stop playing the game, or I'm going to go on like a campaign saying about how bad the game is or the developers are. No, this is just what I want to see personally from the unit creator in the future if they continue to expand on it, which I certainly hope they do, because as it is, it's a great tool, but at the same time it could also be better. So I'm just going to be going through what I want to see from the unit creator in future, and hopefully in future updates. Speaking personally as someone who makes a lot of units and enjoys making units in the unit creator and enjoys making historical factions and historical units, most importantly, which is where a lot of things that I'm going to be saying will come from. So just going onto a standard map here. First of all, what I want to see is things like horses added to the unit creator. Horses, elephants, stuff like that, because as it is you can do it, but it's a time-consuming process. It's a time-consuming process. It doesn't work particularly well. It's a long-winded process. If you mess it up, it will. You'll have to start it from scratch all over again, the unit, which again can be frustrating and can be annoying to do. Because as it is, obviously we do have things like them in the game. We do have, catapults, ballistas, chariots, etc., etc. We do have all of that currently in the game, just not available to us in the unit creator. Things like cavalry. We had the elephants added in a recent update. We got things like the chariots, catapults, ballistas. As you can see, here are my units that I've managed to make. War elephants work the best, which is good, but the problem with these is that they sometimes don't spawn correctly. You can't really get them with armor and equipment on them like that. They just come standard as a horse. You basically have to go off and program your own unit if you do want clothing on the horses. The units that mount them tend to not spawn right. As you can see, this cataphract is not sitting properly on his horse. These other guys also are not correctly riding the horses. You can see this Roman cavalry, they just aren't working. And yeah, they just tend to not work correctly. And obviously, having these units available to us would be great. I would love to add in proper cavalry to things like the Persian units, to the Romans, proper war elephants for the Carthaginians, chariots for the Celts. All of these things would be great, and I would love to actually have them available to us. But as it is, it's a long process. It's difficult to do. It requires going into the game files and actually modifying unit files to actually get them going, and they tend to not work properly anyway, and it's a shame. But I would like to see these things added into the unit creator in the future. So moving on from units like that, I want to now go into talking about the weapons that we've got, weapons and equipment that we've got, and armor that we've got going on. First of all, shields. As we can see, there's a bunch of shield options, but there's also not a lot of shield options. One is that I'd like to see a new oval shield, because as it is, we've only got one option when it comes to oval shields, which is the Centurion shield, which in and of itself is good for Roman factions. But when it comes to any other factions, the Centurion shield doesn't cut it, because there is no option for a different type of ovular shield. We can't even change the colour of it, so you're stuck with the default Roman colour scheme. There is absolutely no way of changing it. It's got no stats, it's got no colour options, and so it means that basically any unit that you want an oval shield for will end up looking somewhat Roman because of the shield, because the shield is a big part of a unit. It's one of the first things that you'll see when you spawn in a unit. The first thing you're drawn to is the shield, because it's a big thing that's a big part of the unit and part of the weapons and all that. But as it is, we've only got one option, which is the Centurion shield, which means that if I'm trying to make any sort of mercenaries or any other sort of classical unit, you know, Venti Axemen, if I wanted to try making some of them, Egyptian infantry with their ovular shield, and even for like late Roman legionary mercenaries who have defected from the Roman army during the ending period of the Western Empire. If I wanted to make things like a mercenary legionary, which I would love to do, I wanted to make a mercenary legionary, but I couldn't change the shield. There is no other option for shield colours with the Centurion shield. You know, Germanic Warband, which have got ovular shields, or even, you know, Bosphorian warriors, Nordic Axemen, auxiliary legionaries. All of these things I can't change because there is no option for a different oval shield. And obviously circular shields, not so much of a problem. We've got the Hotplate shield, the Righteous Paladin shield, which was added in the most recent update, which was a godsend. That sort of solved most problems that I had with getting units with circular shields, because I just added another option. Obviously the Viking shield is great, it's brilliant. But then when it comes to medieval shields, is again another problem, because we don't have a rectangular shield. Sorry, we do have a rectangular shield, and that's another problem, which is that we've got the legionary shield, and then we've got the tribal shield, the tribal wood shield. These are your only two options when it comes to rectangular shields. The legionary shield is not so much a problem, because, well, or rather, it's not as much of a problem as the Centurion shield. Obviously, it will still look Roman no matter what you do. You can repaint it, recolor it, it will still look Roman, but at least you can repaint it. The only other option you have for rectangular shields is the tribal shield, and it's not uniform, it doesn't look civilized, it's got a big hole in it, it's got moss sort of on it, which just ruins the whole aesthetic of it if you're trying to make, again, a classical or medieval army which has got a rectangular shield which is uniform. It's a standing army, or at least levies, and they've got shields like that or shields that are Roman. Again, it's not great. An option for more or different rectangular shields would be great for actually making, again, units that have rectangular shields. I don't think there's as many in Total War Attila here, but if we look on, you know, we look here, Naked Warriors, for example, again, which also comes to my next point, which is sort of rounded rectangular shields. Things like what the Celts use, as you can see here. Gallic Axemen, Naked Warriors, Celtic Warband, you know, mercenary short swords, Gallic Warriors, Celtic Warriors, Naked Swordsmen. All of these guys have got rounded rectangular shields. As it is, the closest thing you have to a rounded rectangular shield is a riot shield. And again, you can't repaint it, and it's only on one half. I mean, the riot shield, if you could repaint it, I wouldn't mind it. You know, it's good enough shape. It's a good enough stand-in for a rounded rectangular shield. I could work with this, but I can't, because you can't repaint it. You can't repaint the glass, you can't repaint the outside, you can't repaint anything, which is, again, a bit sad. And also, one last thing with shields is medieval shields. We've got the Jouster shield currently, and we've also got Footman shield and the Knight shield, which is not so much a problem, except for that. The Footman shield doesn't quite work. Units will quite often get caught up. If you've seen videos where I've used my Byzantine infantry, which do use the Footman shields are just too big. You can't resize them. If I could resize this thing down to about 2/3 its size, it would work great. I could make Normans, I could make Anglo-Saxons, I could make proper Byzantine infantry, I could make medieval infantry, all of which would use the Footman shield, no problem. But I can't, because you can't resize it. And using something like the Knight shield, these shields are just far too large. I mean, look, this one goes into him, and you can't resize them. And that's the problem with these shields. If we had a few more options, for medieval shields, such as a rectangular shield. Again, because a lot of units that I would like to use a rectangular shield for, I can't use because we don't have rectangular shields, but also square shields rather, square shields. You know, I would love to make some where are they? Persian infantry, mercenary Persian infantry, or even just mercenary Eastern infantry, which use rectangular shields which aren't the Roman shields. I would love to make some of them, but as it is, I can't because we don't have the shields available to us. And the same with the medieval shields, which is a bit of a shame. So I would just like to see a couple more shields which are just generic, or you know, just general or generic, striped shields perhaps, which you can just paint one half the shield, a bit like the brawler shield, but a shield which is square, a shield which is kite shaped, a shield which is around a rectangle, and just a rectangular shield. You know, just a couple more shield options, just to give units who want to use a shield but aren't going to be, but you don't want limited to the ancient shield or the centurion shield. That's something that I'd like to see. Next thing is ranged weapons. Bows is not a problem. We've got a bunch of bows, and they've all got different options. You've got, you know, the compound crossbow, you've got a normal crossbow, and you've got the Chinese repeating crossbow. You've got a bunch of different bows here, and you can all change the ammo types. You can change a bunch of it. Bows are fine. Spears as well. Spears are alright. They could be better for the spear throw. There's only two options when it comes to actually spear throwing. Obviously you can change the projectile, which is good, but when it comes to it, you've got two options for the spear. You've got the angelic spear, or you've got this tribal spear, which again, if you're trying to do something like a velite or a peltast which use a javelin, you can't choose a javelin option here. You've got spear or angelic spear. There is no in between for doing something like a javelin, which is a shame because javelins exist, or well, spears at least exist in here. Obviously, having something like an infantry spear, just having that available as an option to throw, or even a short spear as being a throwable option for the spear throw, would be brilliant. But unfortunately, you're stuck with the tribal spear, which, I mean, it works. It's still a throwing spear, but still an option for, you know, a short spear being able to be thrown instead of this would just be appreciated. But the final thing that I would like to see is, obviously we've got two ranged options before you get to firearms. The only other option that I'd like to see is slings, because slings were a big thing in the classical era, but there is no sling option. Obviously, Rhodian slingers, you know, Balearic slingers, mercenary Bretonic spears. There they are. Balearic slingers, famous in the ancient world for their skills with the sling. And you can't make slingers in tabs, which is a shame. I mean, it's not a massive thing. Obviously, slingers would be nice to give a bit more variety when it comes to actual ranged units. Having slingers available would be greatly appreciated. I would love to make some sling infantry. Again, Balearic slingers, auxiliary Roman slingers, things like that would be great to make, but unfortunately I can't make barbarian slingers and all that because they don't exist in the game, unfortunately. So yeah, that's something that I would like to see. One minor thing as well when it comes to swords, at least rather, is I would like to see a curved sword. Curved sword like the Thracians have, or yeah, like the Thracians have, like they have in Hispania and the Balkan area, because the Thracians loved that curved sword, or slightly curved sword, but unfortunately that doesn't exist in tabs. You know, Iberian swordsmen, scutarii. Noble fighters as well. I wanted to make some noble fighters, but unfortunately there is no option for what is it, a falchetta, I think it is, or something like that, the actual curved sword of the Thracians. There is a backwards curved sword, which is the typical curved sword, or you've got things like a cutlass. There, you've got a cutlass, but the swords that the Thracians use, and the sword like you see in Total War Alexander, and you see Alexander in the artwork using that, relatively small but still at least curved forward sword that the Thracians liked using, and yeah, that's not an option. It doesn't exist. Which is a shame. I'd like to see something like that. I mean, the closest thing we have is sort of like a butcher's knife or a kopesh, but a kopesh is, again, it ends up curving backwards instead of just curving straight forwards. So yeah, I'd just like to see a curved sword like that added to the game, because as it is, that doesn't exist. Which is understandable. They haven't had need of adding something like that in because it doesn't. It doesn't. A unit that uses that doesn't exist in tabs. But even so, having something like that would be nice. When it comes to clothing, I don't really have that many complaints or wants when it comes to clothing. My biggest thing that I would like to see is actual scale armor. For example, this mercenary Syrian archer in this picture uses scale armor. Things like the Persian cataphracts, they used scale armor because that was a relatively big thing. Also, things like chainmail. Chainmail was a big thing in not only the late classical era but also the medieval era. People loved chainmail, and as it is, chainmail doesn't exist in tabs. No unit uses it. Again, you see, there's a guy that I would use a rectangular shield for, but there is no good option for a rectangular shield. But yeah, things like cataphracts would use scale armor. Persians love their scale armor, and indeed most of the Near East and Eastern world like using scale armor, but scale armor doesn't exist. Nor does chainmail. As you see, when I make units that use chainmail, for example, let me get up the. There you go. This guy should technically use chainmail, but he doesn't. My where is he? Roman cavalryman. Here he is. I have to get the rider because otherwise the actual unit will break. But yeah, this guy is meant to be wearing chainmail. This is the best you can do for chainmail. You just take a Roman uniform, or indeed any Roman any unit rather, any uniform that you like to have chainmail on, and you just paint it as with a metal grey. There is no other good alternative for making chainmail, and this is the closest you can really get unless you try messing around with some of the armor to get it working. But otherwise, again, things like scale armor, cataphracts, you know, this is the best I can do for chain or scale armor rather. Is using this Roman armor and painting it as much as I can. But yeah, this is the best you can really do for sort of chainmail covered with scale. I mean, again, it's not brilliant. So yeah, having an option for scale armor as just an extra torso or arm armor would be great to have as an option. Because otherwise we're limited on the armor choices ever so slightly. And really the last thing that I'd like to see, other than obviously the thing that people will always ask about, which is more World War clothing, because as it is, you can sort of make modern units with the clothing that's available to you, but it's a bit scuffed and it's a bit make, do and mend, as it were, as it currently stands. But I'm not too interested in making an actual World War faction. There's thousands of them out there on the workshop, I'd imagine. But the last thing that I'd really like to see is custom abilities. I know they've said that they're probably not going to add them, or indeed they might have just said altogether, no, we're not adding it. But if they ever do reconsider it, having an option to make custom abilities, or even just modifying the abilities that are currently in the game, because as it is, they added in a bunch of them with the newest update of tabs, where they added in the good and evil factions. They did add in a load of extra abilities, which is great. Things that weren't in here before have been added. This has been greatly expanded. for example, with the stay orders and the charge orders, so you don't have to be carrying around a banner, for example. This guy just emits an aura around him, which is great. But yeah, just the ability to change abilities. For example, the Jarl gets the Enrage ability, which there it is. The Enrage ability, and the Enrage ability is great because it increases their attack speed and it increases their damage, but it also makes them invulnerable. If there was an option to increase their damage and their attack speed, but not have them invulnerable, for example, that would be great. Because then that would be great for things like my Celts or my Gladiators, where you can give them a Bloodlust ability like they have in Total War, and which would increase their damage and their attack, but at the same time not leave them invulnerable, because as it is, giving them Enrage is just a completely overpowered thing to do, because they would become invulnerable. So yeah, just the ability to change abilities or make your own using the ability options that are currently here would just be a nice thing to have. But as it is, there is plenty of abilities. I don't use most of them because most of them are relatively overpowered. Such as Ice Breath, Fire Breath, Cavalry Charge as well is relatively overpowered as well. Banshee Scream, Mechanic Tank, Cannon Barrage, all of these things are pretty overpowered, which is why I don't use them. But otherwise there's a lot of options for making fantasy or ahistorical or just general factions and general units. But yeah, otherwise that's all that I really have to say on the unit creator. I think the unit creator is great. There's still plenty of options. We've got things like maces, daggers, swords, spears, axes, scythes and all that. And there's a lot of customization, which is good. But at the same time, I feel like having a bit more customization, a bit more sort of generic stuff in here, like I was saying with the generic shields, things like that, and slings and all that would be great to see. But yeah, that's just sort of what I want from the unit creator. Obviously, alongside that, being able to create your own maps, a map creator would also be brilliant, so that you could create things like hill forts and castles and all that would be great. But as it is, yeah, that's just my thoughts on what I want to see from the unit creator, hopefully in the future. So I'll thank you for watching and goodbye.